Mama taught me how to live. Daddy taught me how to give. Both of them had their own sins. Down to the river, every man has felt the shame. All our blood, it runs the same. Father, hear us as we pray. Down to the river, down to the river. Sing, oh, oh, bury me, carry me, oh, oh, far beneath, oh, oh, fire and water me, going down deep, singing, oh, oh, bury me, carry me, oh, oh, far beneath, oh, oh, fire and water me, watching me think, carry Creek.
All right. So basically, the question that was asked for today mainly was, so David brought up that we were going to want to talk about the success that we've had this year, because we've had a really good year so far.
Yeah.
We've harvested 7 deer amongst the group, including 5 bucks and 2 doe.
Yeah.
2 doe.
We've
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yours.
So we want to talk about that some, and then we also want to talk about one of the questions that somebody asked, which was the tactics that we use to minimize the amount of presence or pressure that we put on the deer, and kind of our do's and don'ts and tips and tricks for that kind of stuff, which I think kind of will bode in really well to the success that we've had this year, just for the simple fact that that's really what's led us into our success is, you know, stand placement, the food plots that we've done. Access is like the biggest thing, but we'll go ahead and start with what David has done this year up at the farm, just to kind of lead into everything else that's worked for us.
Well, you're saying just like what I've done. Like Kevin's been out there helping quite a bit too. You know.
Yeah. So what have we done up there at the farm in general, just to like kind of bring everybody else up to speed? Because we haven't released any of the episodes yet for the year or anything to really be able to talk about what we've done up there. So what did we do up at the farm this year? Because, like, mind you, for those of you guys that don't know, obviously we run a 63 acre, almost 64 acre farm that years prior we would harvest maybe 1 to 2 deer off of per year. Whenever I came into hunting, you were lucky to see more than 4 deer per season. To now we're seeing, I mean, what was our best sit so far this year, Dad? Was that on Friday with you and Cato? Because you guys saw 7 deer that morning?
Yeah, it's not the best sit. Caden and I had that one day. We saw like 11.
Yeah, I think they've still had the best sits, but even his most successful was still not quite the best.
Yeah. I mean, that's even for me out here in Virginia. I mean, I've had days where, you know, like my first time out in my stand, I saw 9 deer in that 11 acre set of woods that I hunt. And ever since then, it's been like onesies, twosies, maybe 3 to 4 deer. And then last week, whenever I shot my buck, I only saw 3 deer that morning. I saw one about an hour after light, and then I shot mine 30 minutes after that. And then I had one walk through about 45 minutes after that. But I think that, like, the biggest thing is to kind of set up like what the farm looks like for us this year. The food plots that we've done, the stand placements and all that kind of stuff, and why we've done them like that.
Well, speaking of like seeing deer, the day I shot my buck, I hadn't seen anything that whole day. I mean, David and I walked up on one in the front field on the neighbor's place, but I actually didn't see it. He saw it go over the hill, but I really hadn't seen anything that whole day until I saw that buck.
I think that also leads. Go ahead.
That was also just a midday checking cameras, and we just bumped them up. They were laid down, bedded up, calling it a day even. And he's hunting that field even, and they never came out to daylight. We were checking cameras, like I said, and we bumped them up. And it was just couldn't tell you what it was. It was a flag, but we seen 1 deer that day. And
well,
then
I think
we checked cameras and decided we're going timber, and it was an hour before dark, maybe even an hour and a half before dark. He'd come rolling in for him.
Yeah.
I think that also like leads into like a tactic, because obviously like that's second weekend of rifle season. So in Missouri, rifle season opens on a Saturday and then it runs through not the next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after. So it's about a 2.5 week season.
Well, the Tuesday after, yeah.
Is it the Tuesday after? I can't remember.
Yeah.
It's been too long since I've been up there and hunted.
Fair enough.
So we primarily hunt the Saturday, Sundays. And those are the days where like obviously we're all off work, so everybody can get up there and be together and hunt. Opening weekend we found some success, but like going into like that second weekend, the pressure is really high on these deer. Because they've heard gunshots all week. The bucks are chasing. There's a lot of stress and anxiety just in and of the rut. And then you're also adding in this factor of gunshots all around them, loud noises they only hear a specific time of year. So they're kind of staying in those secluded areas. So being able to find those secluded pockets where these deer feel safe, and getting in as close as what you can to them is going to bode really well, because you're cutting them off. Because I mean, David, you and I know this, but you know, if you sit here and you look at our trail cameras, almost all of our pictures after that first weekend of rifle season were like right at dusk or dawn. They're moving a lot less during those daylight hours because they are, one, in lockdown, and then two, you're also working around the gunshots and everything else. They know whenever it's safe. So they're kind of bunching up in these areas. So that spot where you killed yours at is kind of, he was working out towards the field. He was actually working the ridge behind you, correct? Dad?
He was working the ridge up in the neighbor's property, to be honest. I mean, I just got lucky and he came into the call.
And I think that that's like a good thing to bring up, though, is like our property is what? It's pretty close to 60% fields, 40% timber, would you say?
Maybe a little bit less on timber.
30.
You think it's 70-30? Okay.
Yeah.
So being able to find like those.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
There's some timber that's hard to hunt too. So just because of the lay of the land.
Yeah. But I think that it's important to know like where those places are on your property where those deer can feel safe. So where you guys bumped up that one at whenever you guys were checking cameras midday is a spot that we don't ever hunt. On that one corner of that first field. And then that ridge, we tend to hunt it at least once to twice a year. But those deer feel safe back there. There's not human pressure back there. There's no reason for there to really be human pressure back there other than checking cameras or whatever the case may be. But you've got this big draw that's separated by two ridges that these bucks just love to run. I mean, how many times have we sat back there, Dad, and had bucks just run that ridge constantly?
I've probably seen more bucks on that ridge area than I've ever seen anywhere else on the property in person.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of that bodes to what we're doing as well for the doe population, because, I mean, our population was way out of whack. I mean, it still is pretty far out of whack, but it's getting a lot better. We had for years there where we'd have 10 to 15 different bucks on camera early season, and we'd have like one doe with fawns. And those bucks, we get into that rut and they just move out. They're just like, nope, this is not the place to be at. So they start hitting their rut range. It makes them extremely hard to kill whenever they do that, because you're not patterning the deer at that point. You're just hoping and praying that he just happens to walk by your stand that day.
Yep.
Yeah, another big problem with the Missouri's firearm season is the rut really takes off the week before. So the first week of, full go, where they're active, which we've seen even on our cameras, is always that last stretch of bow season before the rifle. So hit rifle season, you're almost catching the mid to tail end of the rut. So they've already tended the does we have. We don't have a high doe count right now. And they're already moving off to neighbors' farms. And that's why come just this last weekend, late youth weekend, Caden seen a buck we've never seen before and, locked down on him because that buck had already ran all of his properties and didn't know anything about our property and was like, well, let's check this out. Like a one last chance, maybe there's something. And he rolled in.
Yeah, because you have those like 1.5-year-old does or those 2.5-year-old does that might just be like on the cusp of being able to go into estrus. and they may be running a little bit later recycle. Because he came out dogging those does, right, Dad? I mean, he was kind of working them and trying to see what was going on with them.
Yeah,
Not
you have more than one rut too. I mean, does
Yeah.
will go in more
Oh
than
yeah,
one.
there's a second
So,
rut for sure.
Oh yeah.
But I think like one thing that bodes really well to what we've done this year is access into our stands. So like that's one of the biggest things that I know David and I have talked about a lot is being able to minimize the pressure that we put on deer based on stand placement and stand access. And that's one thing that like I noticed that a lot of people do wrong, especially hunting out here in public land. Like I knew that it was a problem before hunting public land, but now that I actually hunt public land and I see it and I'm like, why would you ever go into the woods in that spot and walk the woods that way? You're running right next to the bedding area. You're just going to push all the deer away. They're not going to come back there until after dark.
Right.
You know, like there's a spot on the private land or the public land that I'm hunting where the only access into it is an access road. And I've jumped up 4 to 5 deer in the same spot every single time that I walk down this access road. And I'm convinced these deer are patterning out people. They're like, if we bed right here next to the road, we're going to know if there's people in here because they're going to walk right by us. We bust out and we know that we can't go back to that area because there's people here.
That's true.
And I know that's a thing. Like these deer will actually like sit there and physically, like, I don't want to say target people, but they will pattern out humans just like we pattern them out. And they'll be like, nope, can't go there because there's people there. There's people in this area. So we're just going to hunker down and wait. And then you'll turn them nocturnal again. And that's really hard to work around. So I think that like one of the biggest things that we've done this year is stand access. I mean, the octagon that we put in down there in the bottom field, we've got great access into it. You can sneak in and out of it, even if there's deer on the field. Dad, you had those, what was it, 4 or 5 deer that were out on the field that one day, and you were able to sneak into the blind and watch them.
5, yeah.
Yeah.
Like stand access is everything because this blind is not like pushed up into the brush. It's what, 10 yards off the edge of the field?
Not quite that far.
It's a step or two off the edge of the timber. Like it's pressed up the timber.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty close.
And there's
I mean,
there's a good cedar tree when you're walking up to it that kind of hides your silhouette. It hides you pretty well, and you, as long as you get to the edge quietly and start looking around, you can see most of the field. So,
You're covered before you're, vulnerable.
Yeah.
I think that another good thing to think of about like the access point is out here at Belvoir, I have almost zero open field opportunity. There's not open fields. It's kind of like marshy and overgrown trees. And, you have these isolated pockets of oaks where the deer congregate to eat. And being able to find like the best access into those areas where you're not going to be bumping deer out. Cause I mean, hunting the 11 to 20 acre stretch of wood that I'm hunting, their bedding and food and water is all right there.
Yeah.
So you have to be like dead silent and have like a really good access point in. I walk almost 3/4 of a mile every single time I go in there just to be able to get in as quietly as possible. Cause the next closest spot that I can access this area in, I have to walk past the bedding. It would make it a 200 to 300 yard walk in, which sounds great, but then you realize that you're just running past all the deer in the dark. What are the chances that you bump a deer up in the dark? Pretty good if you're just trampling through their bed. So I think that like access plays a really big role into making sure that you're not just during like the day, or not just at night, but like even during the day, going down to your stands in the afternoon, of not pushing them out of those places where you know that they are.
Well, you trample through my bedroom, you're going to run me out too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I like my sleep. If you wake me up, I'm
not going to be happy.
I think that it's really important to look at those maps. So like we use DeerCast, and the DeerCast map is great. I mean, you've got the satellite, you got a topo map, and a hybrid map. And those maps are phenomenal because you can look at everything on those maps.
Yeah.
And you can almost predict where, hey, I've got this big long ridge right here that overlooks a water source. There's probably going to be oaks up there. And out here, because there is no open fields, that's what they're eating. There's no agriculture here.
Yeah.
So they're hitting acorns, they're hitting those few pockets of clovers that may be here and there. They're hitting the mosses and everything. So you got to find like those food sources and find the access into those food sources for the early season. During rut, you've got to know where those bucks are going to be running at. The bucks are going to be wherever the does are, and they're going to be running those spots. And they're going to be constantly checking their scrapes. Now, the biggest thing to know about scrapes is a lot of bucks don't daylight hit scrapes, but every once in a while. A lot of your scrape movement's going to be nighttime because they're going to come back, they're going to check them, and they're going to bed up close to the scrape if a doe has hit the scrape. So that's like cell cameras have been imperative to us this year. Because we can see, like for me, for example, I have both of my cameras set up on scrapes. And I patterned out the buck that I went and killed last week. I patterned him out over the course of a week. I had 3 shooters that went to the same tree every single day between 8:30 and 10. And did I not, Dad, literally call you the night before and said, I'm going to go kill a buck tomorrow morning? And sure enough, at 7:30, I had one of my shooters walk in and I shot him at 20 yards.
Yep.
Like having that intel from those cell cams, because I'm not having to go in there and be intrusive to go pull an SD card to look. I can get it straight to my phone. I know immediately what's going on. I know what time they're doing everything. And that's going to set you up for success because I don't have to be as intrusive. A lot of the things that people do wrong is they're being too intrusive. They're being too aggressive, especially during the rut.
Yeah, because they have no intel, so they want to pull them cars. They want to get some type of info. And with those cell cams, it's every 10 minutes. It's like, well, let me look. And yeah, there's an extra fee with those cameras, but just the long outlook of just your benefits from doing that is just, it's worth it.
Yeah. So I think that one thing that we should cover is what can you do to improve your habitat? So like we said earlier, we run a 63 to 64 acre property amongst the group. And we have went from almost no deer to the last 3 years, we've harvested 140s plus deer off of it. Every single year we've harvested multiple now 120s to 130s. Whereas before this, it was every 3 to 4 years before you'd have a 130s to 140s get shot. And now we're doing it every year, if not every other year. So,
and on top of that, there are multiple out there still that are that and bigger.
Yeah. So what habitat improvements do you guys think that we are making or that we are going to make in the future? Because we've already started planning for next year. I mean, we've had plans in motion basically since season started of what are we going to do for next year. So what improvements do you guys think that we have made to this point that have helped our property out so much to be able to skyrocket to what it is? Because we're not talking, this is not a 10-year process for us. This has been like
year to year.
3 to 4 years that we've really been hard working on this, but about 5 to 6 years that we've been pretty interested in trying to figure it out.
Well, we started out with just, some corn and stuff before season and some, little throw and grow type stuff here and there. But, we just increased it every year. We did a little bit more here, did a little bit more there, Salt Lick. Now you added in a food plot years ago, and then what David's done this year with the big food plots that he put in has just, it shows. I mean, I've hunted that land for my whole life, and I've never remember seeing deer on that property like what we've seen this year. I mean, watching deer sit there and feed for over an hour in the middle of the field, and watching 2 deer stand out there and feed, and then watching 2 more come in, bump them out, and then they feed for an hour. It's unheard of, really. I mean, never had that happen there.
And then you go ahead.
This was even kind of give or take, like it wasn't a failure, but it was like a letdown on like the production of the food plots because we didn't get the rain we needed. So just that goes to show you, come like next year, if we plan it out right and hit the rain right, and if it's a thriving food plot, just think of how much more amplified it'll be even come to next year. Because half of our food plot crop, you could say, like, didn't even germinate.
No, I agree.
I think that like the biggest thing that people get scared of whenever they go to get into this kind of stuff is, well, I don't have the equipment. And equipment is expensive, don't get me wrong, but I mean, I started off with my Blazer that I had and
Yeah.
a little tow behind ATV disc that I borrowed from a friend. And I got a decent food plot for like 2 years back to back in the same area with just that and some throw and grow. And it wasn't anything crazy, but you know, we had deer that were coming to it pretty regularly that I was able to capitalize on. It doesn't take a lot. I mean, you can borrow stuff from people. We've used the handheld tillers before. Those are a pain just because it takes forever, but it's
Oh, God,
doable. You don't have to do like you don't have to do these massive 3, 4, 5 acre food plots.
Right.
If you stick to my first food plot that I ever did was 1/4 acre.
Yep.
And it
Yeah,
worked.
1/4 acres, you can get it done still.
Oh yeah,
It-
for sure.
And the deer are going to come to it. They're going to seek out that food, especially in these environments where there's not a lot of food. The property that we run years ago used to have to the south. They used to plant that, correct? It used to be planted, wasn't it? On
we used to
Connor's
plant,
land?
we used to plant our old fields. So
I'll say, yeah, that.
Well,
the
no,
property-
I know that. I mean, like even whenever I started hunting, those fields got planted to the south, and
yeah,
a lot of the deer stayed there.
yep.
And then now they don't plant it anymore. We've put in these bigger food plots, and now we're starting to see this big increase of population that's staying local to us, but also we're also seeing an increase in size, not just of our bucks, but our does. And body weight. I mean, we were killing does that were 20, 30, 40 pounds as fawns. And then whenever you were actually shooting like 3.5 to 4.5-year-old does, they were like 60 pounds field dressed, which is scrawny. I mean, that's not a lot of weight. To now we have that one big doe, and I'll throw a picture up here, but we have this doe that is like every bit of field dress, probably close to like 150 pounds, and she's like 6.5 years old. Big nanny doe. And like understanding that you don't have to sink a lot of money into it's really going to increase your odds. So like we've talked about hinge cutting certain areas for bedding. That's almost as inexpensive as it gets to be able to increase your likelihood of being able to see deers create bedding. And then we've talked about some other things that we want to do that are pretty inexpensive. But David, Dad, Jeffrey, can you guys think of anything else that's like super inexpensive that anybody can do?
Oh, a water source is always a good thing if you don't have one real close by of your hunting area. You know, go get one of those little plastic kiddie pools, dig you a hole, stick it in the ground. You don't even really have to dig the hole. If you can go down there and fill it up every now and then, you know, even the rainwater, letting the rainwater fill it up. You don't even have to fill it up that often. If you get it full and keep it to where it's somewhat shaded, deer will come to it. Doesn't matter if it's sitting out on top of the ground. They will drink out of it.
Yeah. The digging it in kind of helps you a little bit with rainfall, so it could almost natural fill itself from time to time.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that just gives them, you know, especially like the getting out of, you know, velvet, this, that, they lose a lot of nutrients, this, that, they need a good water source, and it's hot, you know, in the early season. So they need some water. Come after the, you know, mid to late of the rut, they need water because they've been running themselves ragged, and, you know, water and food, that's what they're looking for. So even those little fixes like that does a lot, and it doesn't take you no time or no cost to get it done.
Yeah.
Well, it's like
And
even
then-
just leaving your food plots close to like creeks, for instance, like most of ours are. That helps a lot too.
Yeah,
Yes.
100%. Access is like a big thing. Even like, so we talk a lot about our access, but deer access as well. Onto these food plots. That was another thing that was pretty heavily discussed. Even like going into next year, we've talked a lot about, hey, we see deer come out of this spot a lot. But
So
if
yeah,
we
it's like cut us trails to our deer stands, but cut them trails to get them to our plots. You know,
Yeah.
scratch their back. You got to scratch their back if they want. You know, you want the output of, you know, seeing things.
Yeah, deer are going to use the path of least resistance. So cutting little trails for them to run, making it easier for them to get to those food plots. But another good one that a lot of people don't think of for bow hunting is not putting your food plot or your tree stand right on top of your food plot, wherein you have to walk down through your food plot to get to your tree stand. And I know that we have that on one of our food plots that you actually killed your buck out of this year, where you have to cross that food plot to get into that stand. But I mean, we've even talked since then about, hey, let's move this tree stand here so that the access is just a little bit better. That way we're not bumping them through.
Yeah. I actually almost moved my stand the day I killed my deer, and I was going to move it to exactly where my deer came out. So that's why I have not touched it since then. I was like, well, leave it be for this year.
Yeah. And I think that like being able to find those, we have the benefit of having like 40 plus years of experience on this farm of knowing where the deer travel at, how the deer travel, where they like to stay at. And a lot of people don't have that luxury, especially on like their own properties or whatever. But get out there. I mean, I've found this has been my best season ever for deer hunting. This is the first year I've ever killed 2 deer in 1 year. I've still got 4 tags in my pocket. I'm literally going out on Wednesday. I'm patterning out does as we speak to go try to fill up the freezer a little bit more. And this is the first time I've ever hunted public land. It's my first time bow hunting or hunting in general in almost 3 years, or just over 3 years. And I literally moved to this place 6 months ago. So like being able to find, like if you know what a white-tailed deer likes and what works anywhere else, it's going to translate over to something else. Do your research. I mean, there's plenty of stuff out there to read up on about deer food and all that kind of stuff. And then study your topo maps. Like that's been like the biggest thing for me. I spent a lot of time. I mean, you can even ask my dad, like I would spend hours just looking at topo maps going, do I go here? Like what's the likelihood that I see a deer here? What's this? What's that? And I spent a lot of time looking at access. I mean, I refused to move my stand earlier this year simply for the point of access, because it was easier for me to get to that other spot. And then I moved it 20 yards closer to where I was seeing deer at. And I killed a doe the first time I got up in the stand. And then the next time I got up into a stand, I killed my first bow buck.
Sometimes the biggest thing is getting out there and sitting and realizing, hey, this isn't a bad spot, but it's not the right spot.
That's one thing that like the military has definitely taught me is you're constantly improving like your fighting position. And that's what hunting is. It's a fighting position. So you're constantly improving your tactics every single time you go out. I heard years ago, and I don't remember who said it, but they said there's no such thing as a bad sit in the woods. And there's a lot of different meanings to that, right? So like you can take it like as like a Bible verse of like, oh my God, I don't have to go to the office today and I get to like sit out in the woods and be with nature. Yes, 100%. That's like the biggest thing. But also like as a hunter, you're gathering intel every time you sit in that stand. You're going, hey, I need to move this stand this way, or I need to, even if it's just simply positioning the stand differently so that you're harder for the deer to pick off. One of the biggest things that I've learned this year is positioning my stand where the sun goes down behind my back or rises behind my back so that there's a shadow over me so that the deer can't pick me off as easy. That's been like huge for me this year because I'm getting picked. I use a climber stand and I don't have cover. Your cover is what's above you, which means the deer either needs to be right below you or they're probably going to see you. But being able to position that climber stand so that I'm using the shade has made it where I can get away with a lot more movement and not get picked off. The doe that I shot walked straight at me, and the buck that I shot walked straight at me, and I never got picked off out of the stand. Do what?
And for you, we all know you move.
Oh yeah, 100%.
For sure.
I'll fight every one of you. So I think that like that kind of stuff is important. Knowing your herd is like super important. Knowing what your herd is at now and being able to log what you're seeing every single year, and being able to remember what worked last year, what didn't work last year, what's worked in years past has been super, super, super important for us. Cause I mean, we're seeing deer come out in the same spots. They acted the same way every single time they hit the plot. They may come out at different times, but they're constantly coming from the same areas, hitting the plots in the same way, and then working out the same spot. And you have to take that intel into the back of your head. If you don't make a move on it this year, make a move on it next year. Hey, I know at that back plot, the deer always come out of the north. They feed to the south. They work into the timber there. Okay, set yourself up in a position where whenever they feed in from the north, you have a shot opportunity before they get into the timber into the south, or set up in the timber to the south, or set up to the north. So you can catch them either coming to or going from feed. I think that that's like another thing that you have to keep in mind going into a hunt is it's always intel gathering. You're always putting stuff in the back of your head of what can I do to make this better?
Well, then another side note of that. So it's, I got to be here, got to be there, because about this time they're going to do this or that. You also got to look at, well, if I chose to sit up here and this is like early travel, they're coming through here, you got to prepare yourself right then and say, hey, well, they're coming through here like to start the evening off. So I need to be there, instead of the typical 2 hours before dark, I need to be there 3.5, 4 hours before dark. I have to get in my stand, an hour and a half, 2 hours earlier. So I catch them while they're still bedded, sneak in before they get on their feet. I can't be rolling in the same time everybody else does and they're already on their feet, because I'm trying to one up them and get where they're coming from, not where they're going.
Yeah.
Yep.
That also feeds in really well to like what I've been able to do this year out here. There was times where hunting in the mornings, I would bump up a deer every single time I was walking in. And I was like, why am I always bumping up these deer? Why are they always on their feet in this one specific spot, which is a big clearing between where I have to park at and where my stand is. And
deer are always a little bit on their feet before sunrise. So depending on how the property lays and how the deer movement is, sometimes morning hunts just are almost a bust. Or it's almost better if you waited till like daylight or right after daylight. It just depends kind of what you're working with.
And what I've been able to do is I get in the stand an hour earlier, and all of a sudden now I'm seeing deer like I was the first weekend that I went out there. I think like a big thing that I want to hit on, because I can't really hit on what's going on the private land, really. I can sit here and talk about what I've heard, what I've seen on video, what I see on the trail cameras. But for public land, for those of you guys that hunt public land, know where the people that are around you are hunting at. Know where there's a lot of pressure. A lot of these guys that go out and hunt these public lands, they don't want to go real deep into the woods.
Yeah.
They go that first 300, 400, 500 yards and they're like, oh, this is good enough. Go that extra 500, 600, 700, 800 yards. There's not going to be pressure.
Well, I know you've had a lot of issues with that on public land, running into other hunters. How's that been? It's
been super frustrating. It's not frustrating in and of the fact that there's other people there. You expect that whenever you hunt public land. It's frustrating because, like, one of the guys in particular, I would get climbed up into the tree. I get there religiously between 1 and 2 p.m. every single time. I get set up in the stand early so that my scent has time to dissipate out of the area. I can be there for any early movement. I'm still trying to learn this area. And this same guy, 2 sits in a row, walked into the same stretch of woods that I was in and set up his tree stand. The first time he set up 30 yards from me, I literally ranged the tree. He got halfway up the tree, got upset that I was there, climbed down, made a bunch of noise and left. The next time he walked down, climbed up into a tree about 120 yards from me, and I grunted in like a 150s to 160s buck right under his tree, and he shot him. It's super frustrating, and it's part of the public land hunting. It's part of the sport. But I think that, like, if you know where other people are hunting at, you're going to know where the pressure is. So, like, I don't go to that spot anymore. I refuse to hunt that specific area just because of the amount of pressure that I know is there. And I'm fortunate enough that we use iSportsman, so I can look at where people are checking in at. I can look at the harvest data, and I can know that particular unit has had, I believe, up to this point, and it hasn't updated for the last week, but it's had like 5 deer taken off of it, including 2 good bucks. And then you look at like other areas like where I'm hunting at. I'm the only person that hunts there. And I've harvested 2 deer out of it. And I still am constantly seeing deer out there.
Right.
So I think that like going in and knowing where there's little to no pressure at is going to make you more successful, because these public land tracts, you have the access to hundreds of acres typically. And being able to determine, hey, I know that there's a lot of pressure over here. I see vehicles over here all the time. I see people here all the time. But if I go to this area, my access may be a little bit worse for me, right? I may have to hike another mile or two or whatever, but there's not going to be people there. And that's what these deer are looking for, is they're looking for people. And if you're able to find those good access points where there's just good movement and predictable movement because there's no pressure, you're going to be successful on public land. I thought going into this, it was going to be way harder than what it was. And I'm sure that I'll end up getting humbled at some point and I'll be put in my place. But as of right now, I've had great success this year. I've seen a deer on almost every single one of my sits. Some sits, multiple deer. And I've been fortunate enough to harvest 2 really nice deer. So I think that like doing your research and knowing what's going on around you bodes really well to your success whenever you guys come out and do these hunts on public land. Go ahead.
Not to interrupt, but I had a friend of mine who used to hunt public land constantly. And he got lucky. He found a farmer that owned the land that backed up to the public land. He wasn't able to hunt the farmer's land, but the farmer would let him cross his land to get onto the public land. And he said the best part about hunting the backside of the land, he said, everybody was pushing deer back to me. He said, I'd have hundreds of deer walk in front of me over a season. And 2 years in a row that I know of that he hunted there, he got 140s plus class bucks with a bow.
Yeah, it's definitely doable on public land. You just have to make those relationships with people that have hunted the land before. And I've done that. I've made friends with people that have hunted the land before, and using what you have at your fingertips. I mean, a really good point of contact is conservation agents. And a lot of people don't think about that, right? But these conservation agents, they're out there at these places constantly. They're checking deer. They are out there looking for wounded deer, whatever the case may be. They're just walking the property, just see what's going on, make sure nothing illegal is happening. They know where the deer are, and they're going to tell you. Especially if you call me, you're like, hey, I'm a bow hunter. I'm struggling a little bit with finding deer. I'm hunting this particular area. Do you know anything about it? Or do you know anybody who knows anything about it? They will get you in contact with somebody or be able to give you a point of direction. And I think that that's like a really undervalued piece of information, is the people that work on these lands. If you go to like the like national forests, like the park rangers and stuff like that, like those people know what's going on in their areas, and they're going to be able to point you towards where animals are. And the best part about that is that it's probably going to be the safest hunting that you can do on public ground, because they're not going to point you towards where people camp at. They're going to point you towards where there's game, so that you're not going to be making those mistakes.
That was like last year. I finally decided I'm going to try a little bit of public hunting, especially when it comes into the later portion of the year when it's starting to snow and this and that. So our alternative methods always break out like right at Christmas. Well, by then they're all stuck on food. There's this one piece of public land not far from where we're private hunting here in Missouri that they keep the crop standing in one bottom field year round. They don't even pick it. And nobody touches that property. Like, I haven't tried it during the November portion, so I don't know if during the main season a few people are out there, but I went out there 6 times last year and never seen a single hunter. And yes, it's at the very back of the property, this or that, but just a little bit of, how I found that was calling a conservation agent. Hey, this or that. Like, I haven't had good luck on my farms. What's good farm around me that I can go try that's your all's?
These conservation agents are going to help you out. In Missouri, you have like 2 or 3 conservation agents that run a particular county, and they know that county like the back of their hands. And if they don't know, they will find somebody that does. I promise you.
Oh,
and
yeah.
9 times out of 10, they're very, very, very knowledgeable on the areas, and they're going to be able to point you in a direction. It may not be like the best hunting that you've ever had. You may not see like 60, 70 deer per sit, but your chances drastically increase whenever you talk to these people. And the worst that can happen is you call them and they say, I don't know, but I can do some checking around, or I don't know, and I don't know anybody that would. That's the worst thing that can happen. And these numbers are public. It's not hard to get a hold of these guys. So that's definitely like helped me out on the public side of being able to find those areas where there's low pressure and keeping it low pressure myself. Another big thing that I think that a lot of people misuse and don't think about is like their scent control. I think that a lot of us that hunt religiously, you know, we spray down with our field spray and we're like, oh, I'm all good, right? But you have to think about that year round. Your trail cameras.
Taking the extra step of going to that, you know, especially when you're in the stand, like the ozone killer, that's been a whole game changer for me. I've had deer many times straight downwind from me. I'm just in a ladder stand out in the open and forgot, you know, in a hurry, got off work early, didn't spray down. I just ran my ozonics or not even ozonics, even the off brands do just as good. So I didn't run ozonics till this year. Even the off brand ones like Scent Slammer, this or that, like just that ozone killer, like it's a game changer, night and day difference. Even just dry washing your clothes in a tote before you go out, not even running it in the stand, has made a night and day difference. I've had deer many times straight downwind and they don't even detect you.
Actually, a really good point to bring up the tote as well. I think that's another thing that people don't think of is they're like, you know, those guys that get super big into the scent away stuff and they're really serious about bow hunting like we are. And they're like, you know, I've got to wash my clothes so that they're scent free. But then they take them out and they like throw them in a dresser drawer, or they take them out and they just like fold them up and leave them on the washer or dryer until they're ready to go out. And then they just throw them on and go hop in their vehicle and go. That's not scent free. It's scent free as soon as you take it out of the dryer. As soon as you put it down somewhere, it's collecting scent. It's a cloth. And it's going to stick to that cloth. It's super hard to get rid of.
And I will say I will say in a laundry room, that's one of the worst places to leave stuff, because every laundry room I've ever been in, you can smell mountainy fresh stuff or this or that or something else.
It smells like Tide Pods.
It smells like your laundry detergent.
Whatever your normal laundry detergent is, yeah.
I think that, like, getting a totes are not that expensive. Get a tote. One of the things that I used to do years ago, and I didn't do it this year, but years ago, I used to take leaves from the area that I was hunting at, and I would throw them in the bottom of the tote so that that aroma of those leaves that these deer are comfortable around is kind of getting in there with my clothes. You know, I'm not like spraying down with autumn fall smell and, you know, making myself smell like a pine tree, but it's something. It's something that's going to make you smell like the area that these deer are in. It's going to keep them more calm. And this year even... Go ahead.
Even another thing that you can do, like you want to go the most inexpensive route. You put your camo on, you go out, you hunt. You come back to the house to maybe take a lunch break. Take your clothes off, and even if you don't have the ozones, this or that, just hang your clothes outside from a tree limb or on a clothesline. Just leave them outside, out in, you know, the elements, if it ain't raining or such, where your clothes are gonna get soaked. Because even that, overall of it, is probably a better output than, you know, even the ozone stuff, because that is, you know, your environment, your nature, you know, that's the wind, you know, all the smells, that's outdoors. It's not, you know, the house. As soon as you get into the house, I always take my clothes off. Like I have a tote and I do it that route, but if you don't have a tote or don't want to do all that or don't want to buy the ozone killer, just go hang them out on the line.
Yep.
I think another big thing to think about, and this is something that I've recently started to think about, and something that I know I've talked pretty extensively with everybody in this group about, is rubber boots. I've always been a big supporter of super lightweight cloth boots, and you know they're super easy to slip on. I can tie them. I know that they're tight and they're good to go. And I'm still using cloth boots. I use my military boots to go out and go hunting. But these rubber boots, they don't hold scent. They don't. Because it's rubber, it's not a cloth. So it just literally dissipates the scent almost immediately. And And that's another good way to be able to eliminate one more factor of scent holding is different boots, different clothing items. And I know I've talked to Dad specifically about this, but your clothing, I know that we've all been guilty before of wearing our bibs all the way down there to the stand. And we're like, well, it's going to be 40 out tonight whenever it gets dark. So I might want to be layered up a little bit. So I'm going to throw on my bibs now. And then we walk all the way down to the stand and you have sweated the whole way down to the stand. Now you've done no justice to your scent control because you've just introduced all that scent right back into your clothing. So finding a way to either low pro your kit that you're wearing down to less, or carrying in that stuff with you that you may need if it gets colder is
that's the best way.
Yeah, I carry too big of a pack probably than I should, but I've got my bibs, my big coat and everything in there. And I walk down with little to no clothes, and I try to always get down early enough. I have that almost 30-minute window to where, all right, I've calmed down, I've relaxed. Now the chill's starting to hit. And before I make too much movement, when the deer movement's happening, now I can put my layers on real fast.
I think that that's like a super important thing that a lot of people don't think about is the scent factor doesn't just stop whenever you shut the door to your vehicle. It has to last through the entire hunt. And like even last week, whenever I killed my buck, I remember I was talking with Dad and I was like dying because I was like, it's got to be like 60 or 70 degrees out right now. And I pulled out my phone and I like looked at it and it was 40 degrees, like almost on the dot. It was like 42. It's because I had too many layers on. I was sweating through all my layers. I was getting hot because it doesn't leave, obviously, if you're wearing 400 gram insulation or insulate. So you're just like weighing yourself down with all these extra clothes and you're just making yourself hot and sweaty and you're just leaving this big scent bomb of, hey, dear, I'm here. Don't come to this spot. So finding a way that works for you. Don't just take like our word for it. I can sit here all day and tell you like, I would do this, that, the other, and I would try this, and I want to try that. This is what works for us. You have to implement a regimen that works for you, that makes sense for you, and that you can stick by. I think that's like the biggest thing that people don't do is they don't stick by the regimen that they set for themselves. They're just like, I want to do this. They do it at the very beginning of season because they're dedicated. And then as the season wears on and you start to get tired, you're like, it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, season fatigue, people will, from time to time,
Oh, yeah.
I've even seen it myself, like, oh, well, okay, this or that. But and you'll see it in your hunts. Like, if I was a little bit off on my, routine, not even the scent side of it, this or that, like, oh, I ain't going to bring half my gear, this or that. Like, either something comes up to where you needed it or, you just, I don't know. If your head ain't always in it, it could, you never know where it's going to go.
100%. Another thing that's super important as far as keeping the pressure down that I don't think a lot of people think of, and I don't think about it a lot of times either, is your calling frequency. How much you're calling, how you're calling, what kind of calls you're using is a really big one. Because like I use a Illusion Systems extinguisher, and I have called in more deer this year with that thing than I have ever called in the past. I mean, I have had multiple opportunities this season to shoot deer that I've passed on just because the encounter was cool. And I was just like, I'm not going to shoot a deer right now. I just want to be here with the deer. And, I can't use, I cannot use a fawn ball right now to call in a doe during the rut because the rut's still kind of working here in Virginia. It's right at the tail end. I can't use a fawn ball to call in a doe right now. They're not going to be receptive to it. They're going to be a little bit more skittish, because they've been being chased by all these bucks and everything. So if I throw out a fawn ball, the likelihood of me having that doe come in is slim. So knowing like what calls make sense for the time of season that you're hunting is super important. If you're on that doe patrol early season, which is what a lot of people love to do, get that first venison in the freezer, get that opportunity to make sure that you're doing everything right up there in the stand because you've probably got way more doe than you do bucks. That's a good time to set that up for yourself. and practice your calling, but know what calls work and what time of season. I'm not going to be rattling September 1st whenever season opens here in Virginia. That doesn't make any sense. The deer are not rattling. So why would I be?
Deer rattle.
Huh?
Deer rattle.
Fighting antlers. You know what I meant. Smart.
Sorry, I had to.
I hate you.
What I've noticed from calling is more and less, like, from what I've seen just from all the years of hunting, is rarely you'll hear something, So your almost better bet is to stay quiet. But when you do have that one that's holding up, or he's not this or that, and it's a 1-2 grunt, kind of soft, and coax him. As soon as you go to like trying to draw him in and you start like grunting at him, you've already done too much. You can easily overcall deer. So it's you think you didn't do enough, but that 1-2 hit, maybe just kind of a couple softs and a hard one, that's about all you need, and they will come, or they're not having it. And if they're not having it, don't keep calling, because you'll ruin the rest of your hunt for the rest of the night.
I'm guilty of that this year. Even I had a buck working on me. It'll be the third episode for this year. Where I had a buck working on me, and I was trying to coax him in because I was all amped up. You get that adrenaline going. You got a good buck out there in front of you. And I overcalled it like way too much. And even whenever I was talking to Dad about it, I was like, I didn't grunt at him that hard. And then you watch the video back, and I was like screaming at this deer that was like 20 yards from me. Yeah. And I'm like, I did not realize that I was being that loud. And this deer, I mean, he didn't run off or any, like he turned around and he like ended up going around me and coming back up downwind of me.
That buck was wondering what the heck was wrong with you, is what he was thinking.
Yeah,
100%. And then like I overdid it again because I panicked, right? Because I'm like, oh man, like this deer's right here. So I grabbed my rattle bag to try to coax him in again. And what I didn't know is this deer had walked up on my left, and he was standing at 25 yards from me on my left. And whenever I hit the rattle bag, he picked me off immediately.
Yeah.
And he was like, nope, see ya. And he went flag up and went the other way. So like being able to determine, what is too much for your area. And that's all going to be based off of pressure. It's going to be based off the deer, A big thing to note as well is, do I need to be using rattling antlers? Does it make sense? And I don't mean that in of the sense of like what I said a minute ago of early season versus late season or during the rut. But if you have deer that are staying, even racked, they're not breaking off tines or anything like that. Are those deer as aggressive? Are they going to be as receptive to those rattling antlers? Probably not. They're not fighting a whole lot if they're staying mainframed, especially like these smaller deer, these 150 or not 150, sorry, these like 120s to 130s. If you have a couple 150s and they're fighting, these 150s are probably going to break off some of these smaller bucks, and some of these smaller bucks may even break off some of these bigger bucks. But if you're not seeing that, if you're just seeing straight framed deer year round, they may not be fighting that much. Do I want to add that extra weight into my pack to carry down there with me?
Do you have the aggressive enough bucks in your area is the biggest thing. And one aggressive buck, if he's running an area, unless you find him, you may not get that buck to come in on a call. Now, if you remember a few years back, Hunter, the 8-point that I had, I was over the top aggressive when I called him in.
Mm-hmm.
But everything was right. The conditions were perfect for me being overly aggressive with him, and it drove him nuts.
And there's a lot that goes into that, a lot more than just like conditions. It comes down to the deer. It comes down to weather.
Well, a lot of it, especially when you get into the rut, is the population. So like how, if they have more does and they know what to do with, they're not going to be aggressive. If they're hurting for does, that's when they'll start getting fierce,
Oh yeah, no, 100%. You've got to know the population that you're working with. Like that's why. So the buck that I killed last week, I rattled him in, and he came in all bristled up and everything. And sadly, I didn't get that on camera because I had worked this other deer in, and I had just lost sight of him. And I no more than sat down and did my post-encounter interview. And I heard something. I looked over to my left, and this deer came in all bristled up, and he was head down walking straight at me. And these bucks in this area, from the camera that I had set up, I had probably, I think it was about 5 or 6 different bucks over the course of about a 5-day period that had hit this one particular scrape. So I knew this scrape was hot. I knew there was a doe in the area that was hot. And I had bucks that were broken off. I have multiple bucks in this area that are broken off. So there's a buck in this area that's staying pretty close to here that's fighting. So I knew that I could go in there and be maybe just a little bit more aggressive. And I went through a couple rattling sequences that morning and a couple grunt sequences. And that's what I believe brought this deer into me. But the other smaller buck that had come in before that, I tried to grunt him in, and he just did not have it. He did not like it at all. And he was busted up. He was broken up. He did not want to fight. So being able to like,
he didn't like that at all.
Yeah, you have to be able to like see what these deer are doing whenever you see them. You know, I understand like the blind calling and all that kind of stuff. I do it occasionally. I probably do it a little bit more than what I should, but being able to put eyes on that deer and being able to see what calls they're receptive to, you're going to know immediately. You know, if that buck comes in all bristled up with his ears pinned back, you've done everything right. You have set this stage that there is a deer out here that wants to fight or that is fighting. Maybe there's a hot doe there with him. And that's what I love about this extinguisher call is it has that external slide. So I can, you know, rip a couple tending grunts, slide it up to a doe bleat, hit a doe bleat really quick, wait for a couple minutes, throw in a couple more grunts, maybe a snort wheeze, and then wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then throw in a little rattle sequence. I have now set the stage that there's 2 bucks here and a hot doe. And these other bucks that are in the area, especially these mature dominant bucks, they're going to come check it out. They're going to come and look. You may not lay eyes on them. They may not come right to your stand. But they're going to come into that general vicinity to look at what's going on.
If they hear it, they'll come check. But that's where you have to be careful because you may not see them. But if you get too aggressive or too over the top, if they hear something don't sound right, that's when they'll say, I think I'll go somewhere
Don't
else.
like this. 100%.
Without you still ever knowing. They won't ever blow their cover.
Nope.
Another thing with that is when you are using your calls and whatnot, you want to make sure you're not making too much movement at the same time.
Yep.
Because if they can see you and you're still using your calls or your rattle or whatever, and you're making a bunch of movement, they're going to see you using it.
Yeah. I think another big thing is imitating what's in your area. So everybody's probably pretty familiar with the Primo's Buck Roar or the Magnum Roar or whatever, right? That's got that little banding system it's got like...
I use the Rut Roar.
You know, you've got the little dial system or whatever with the O-ring, and it's got top buck or trophy buck. It's got mature buck. It's got young buck. If you don't have 150 plus inch deer, you're not going to be using the trophy roar because these little bucks are not going to come and check it out. They're not. They're going to...
with mine. I have the Rut Roar. I have that. I never once put it on the trophy. I always, mature buck to young buck. Like almost a little fierce and scrappy little guy is what I always try to imply. So the mature deer are like, oh, well, he thinks he's tough. Let me show him what's up. That's what I always go with.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I was just saying that was a good point.
Dad?
Yeah. What's that?
I thought you were about to say something.
I'm just trying to get Hallie to go outside.
Oh, she's not going to. I think that it's also super important to know what a good sequence sounds like and looks like. And that's something that I didn't know prior to this year. I did a lot of research before this year of what a good sequence looks like, what's going to bring these deer in, what's going to make it look right, what's going to set the scene for this buck to think that there's a fight happening or that there's a doe in the area or whatever the case may be. And you have to set that scene for these deer. You're not just going to be able to just throw out grunts willy-nilly and think that a deer is going to come into it. You have to set that scene for them to believe that that's what's happening. And that's like goes back into knowing your herd, knowing what's going on, what time of year it is. all that kind of stuff. Because even like doe grunts, for example, they change throughout the year. You know, early season, they're this real short meh, meh. And then once you get into like close to the rut, they really extend them out and they make them a little bit louder. And then you go into these doe bleats and they're just real drawn out 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds long. But if I threw out that 5, 6, 7, 8 second long estrus bleat early season, I'm going to blow my area out because these deer are going to go, something ain't right here. So knowing what calls make sense at different times of the year is super important as well. And that's something you kind of got to do your own research on, see what your deer in your area are doing. Because I can sit here all day and preach about Missouri deer versus Virginia deer and tell you, but I've never hunted Minnesota. I've never hunted Texas. I've never hunted any of these other places where whitetail hunting is like super popular to be able to say, well, your guys' prime time to be using such and such call is from this time to this time. That's something you kind of have to.
Weather can change that altogether anyway, also.
Yep.
Weather always trumps, like moon phase, rut, this, that, time periods. If the weather's right, the weather's right. The deer are going to act.
Yep.
That's just it.
Yep.
I think that it's important to keep that in mind as well. That's actually brings up another really good point is DeerCast. So we use DeerCast. Dave and I specifically use that religiously. I mean, we are constantly looking at what the forecast is 10 days ahead of where we are now. What days are going to be good? So for example, for me this week, so today's the 27th of November. I'm off the 30th and the 1st. The 30th is poor weather conditions. It's supposed to be raining all day. I don't want to be miserable sitting out in the rain. I've done that 3 times already this year. Haven't seen a deer on any of those sits. I'm not going to do it to myself. But the next day, I have a massive cold front that's moving in. Temperatures are dropping 20 degrees, and DeerCast says it's supposed to be great movement. That's the day that I want to be out in the stand. I don't want to go out there in these miserable conditions where it's 50, or not 50, but like 70, 80 degrees out, high wind, all that kind of stuff. That just, you want to be as comfortable as what you can in your stand, and that's going to lead to success. If you're uncomfortable up in your stand and you're just not having a good time, change it. Figure out what's wrong, what makes it uncomfortable, and change it so that it's in your favor.
I will say, so if you do have, like you said, the next day is a cold front, and it's, that's the ideal day. But if that's the day it's raining, like if it's a light drizzle in a solid cold front, you do almost want to fight the conditions, because them bucks and, everybody will get on their feet because they were either held up the day before because it wasn't ideal. They knew a storm was rolling in, and the storm didn't turn out to be what it was. And I've seen a lot of activity, even on a light drizzly day, like a heavy rain. Yeah, stay at the house. But if it's a light drizzly day and it was a cold front, that's a good time to get out. Yeah, it's gonna suck. You're gonna need rain gear, but that is a good time to be out.
100%. And this also goes back into your clothing choices, like you just said, rain gear. So for example, for me to get to my stand, I know I've told all of you guys about this because it's awful. Every single time after it rains, I have to go through a marsh to get into the spot that I love to hunt. And I sync up. I will fight you. I sync up to my hips every single time I walk through this marsh. And I wear my pants and cloth boots. And I am miserable every single time I get up into my tree stand. I know that's a shortcoming on my part. I can get new boots. I can get waterproof boots. And I can make myself more comfortable. I just haven't done it yet because I haven't found something that I want to spend the money on.
I've seen guys wear hip waders to get through stuff like that to get to the right hunting area.
100%. You have to tailor your equipment to the area that you're hunting at, and what makes sense for what you're hunting and how you're doing it. So like a good example is we as a group, the 4 of us are planning to possibly go out to Nebraska next year and go mule deer hunting. None of us ever been mule deer hunting as far as I know.
Yeah.
Well, that takes a very different set of gear than what it takes for whitetail hunting. So you have to kind of tailor your gear around what you're looking at and what you're hunting and the conditions and the time of year and knowing what actually works. So those are all some different things to keep in mind whenever it comes to hunting these deer year round is you've got to kind of figure out what the moon phases look like, what days are going to be good, what days are going to be bad. Do I have the right equipment to be out on this specific day? So on and so forth. So I think the episode in 2 weeks from now, we're actually going to cover gear specifically, what each one of us carries down into the field with us. And you're going to realize that there's a lot of gear that we carry that we do carry that has a purpose. I empty out my pack almost after every single hunt just to go, oh, I didn't use this, I don't need it, and shed those ounces. Comfortability is like the most important thing. And then like I can be like, oh, but I do wish that I had this, so I'm going to throw this in there so that I have it for next time. So on and so forth. And that's like a super important thing that I think a lot of people neglect whenever they hunt is they carry in these 50, 60, 70 pound packs. And I'm like, why do you carry in a pack that's that heavy? You're already carrying in your weapon, whatever that may be, plus your stand possibly if you're, doing mobile hunting. And then you're also going to add in all this extra gear that you're never going to use. Why? What's the purpose? And I think that that's a super important thing that we should cover next week is what's in your pack and what's the purpose of it and why do you have it there?
A lot of that still plays into preference and comfort, So Some people, would be like, hey, but I do need this. And there's other people that, they're all old school. Like I'll go out with my flannel and I'll just wear an orange vest and I'll just sit next to a tree and call it good. And they have success too.
Now, speaking of flannel real quick, there are certain states that flannel is not allowed.
Maryland.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Maryland is so ridiculous. I was looking at the rules and regulations out there a while back because I was considering trying to go seek a stag hunting. If you don't know what that is, it's basically like a little elk thing. I don't even know how to explain what it is. It looks like an elk, but it's like a third the size of a white-tailed deer. It's a super weird animal, but they're super cool looking. And they're like jet black. But I was looking at the regulations in Maryland and it's like, you can't wear flannel, you can't wear blue jeans, you can't wear this, you can't wear that. It's like the most ridiculous thing. Basically, they require all their hunters to wear some type of camo. And like I as a hunter that enjoys wearing camo, appreciate that, but I also know some people that are super old school. Our grandfather, for example, I don't think that man ever owned a pair of camo in his entire life that he ever wore for more than a day.
And the thing was, still killed more deer than anybody we know.
Oh yeah, 100%. I've never met a man that can go out there in like blue jeans and a blue shirt.
Yeah,
walk down there and 20 minutes into opening light kill a deer. Like he can.
If it was real cold, he put a Carhartt on, but it was still blue.
Or tan.
Man was like something else.
But then he also went out on crutches one year and killed a deer on crutches.
Yeah.
Ability to work around adversity is super important, especially in deer hunting. I think that's a thing that has to be addressed as well. Is like, you're gonna face adversity some years, and being able to work around it. Like, I know that a good one that a lot of us can probably relate to is having your target deer killed.
Yeah.
That sucks. It really does. Or blowing your target deer out. That's even worse. If you have a deer, I had a deer a number of years ago that I had named King Tut. He was a real big 8, similar to the ones that you guys shot. And I was dead set on killing that deer. I was like, that's the deer I'm going to kill this year. And I remember I was sitting in the blind one day down there in the second field on my food plot and messing around. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go back up to the house. So I started packing up. It was like, I don't know, 9:45. I was young and dumb. I was like, no movement after 9. So whatever. I haven't seen anything yet. I got my pack halfway, packed up everything in. And I look up and my target buck is standing 20 yards from me looking into the blind. And he ran off and flagged. And I don't think we ever got another picture of that deer ever again. And that was the most defeating thing ever. And then I went out that night and I shot like a 20-pound fawn just because I wanted to take my anger out on something. No, realistically, so I want to defend that choice for just a second here because somebody's going to make a comment after we get off of here. One of you three is going to make a comment after we get off of here about, oh yeah, you killed a 20-pound fawn. I could have picked that deer up, not field dressed with one hand. That deer was tiny.
She might have weighed 23 pounds.
I think you're giving her a little bit.
26 once you've walked about a mile.
Well, it was so bad. Let me defend that choice. So I was in the military at the point in time. I only had a certain amount of days left, and I was like 2 days away from leaving. So I knew that that was probably like the last time I was going to be able to get out to go hunt. That was the only reason I shot that doe. And I'm going to stick with that story till the day I die. Anyway, that doe, whenever I shot her, Dad came out to go help me look for her and everything. I knew that she was dead. I watched the arrow go through the pump house. It was 37-yard shot. We walked over there and we picked up blood really quick. And of course, both of our phones died about 5 minutes into us looking for this deer.
Of course.
She went through that finger in the second field going north, that big set of woods, like where your mother's doe died at.
Okay.
She went through that. So we were finding blood here and there. And of course, we had no flashlights left hardly. Like nothing was working. So Dad was like, I'm going to go get the truck and I'll grab flashlights for us. So I'm standing there and he starts walking up there to the house. And I think I took 2 more steps and we were literally standing on top of the deer. She was so small, we could not see her in the fields. And mind you, the fields had been baled that year.
Now the grass was only like 8 inches tall, and she wasn't as tall as the grass laying down.
Oh, Jesus.
It was bad. That deer was tiny.
Did you at least wipe the milk off her chin before you brought her up to the house?
Well, I was trying to figure out what kind of Sharpie I needed to use to get the spots off her side is really what I was worried about. I was like, what color brown do I need to use here to fix this issue? Like, I'm going to bring this thing up there and the kids are going to come running out of the house thinking I brought a dog back. Sorry, guys. Yeah. But equipment plays like such a vital role, and we'll cover that in an extensive period of time next time. But making sure that your stuff is charged. I cannot tell you how many times this year even where I've went down there into the woods and my flashlight has died on my way out or on my way in, and I'm like, well, time to break out the phone and use the phone to get in. Like, you know, as much as what you hate to do that, that's what you have to do sometimes. So I think that we can discuss that here in a couple weeks. But
a lot of like good access, this and that. So I like to always cut and get it set up and everything to where it gets to the point where it comes season, you know your path, where you don't even have to turn a light on when you're getting in and out. You can just walk it and it's clear path. You know the clear path.
Yep.
And then on top of that, when it comes to I did get a deer, this or that, and I do need to track, like I carry extra batteries for just cameras, because if I was down there and the least intrusion, oh, this camera's almost dead, while I'm down here hunting, I'll go ahead and switch his batteries out and make my way out. And then like for the light, this, that, like I carry a whole bag of batteries the best I can. There's been a time or two I just didn't have batteries, but as well as I can, I always keep extra batteries for everything, even the gear it's always in the field, like your cameras, the gear you have on you. You know, try your best to always just keep batteries and, you know, such, just because, you know you need it.
Well, my issue is that, you know, I'm like one of those save the turtle kind of people, you know, plastic straws or no, just kidding. But I thought that would be a good idea for me to buy a rechargeable headlamp. And it's great. Don't get me wrong. It's a Bushnell rechargeable. It's a great headlamp. Works really well. I love it. But I have this really bad tendency of not recharging things whenever I know that they need to be recharged.
Or turning it on accidentally and letting it
Or turning it on accidentally. That
day.
happened once this weekend, or
Lit up
this
in your
weekend this
backpack.
year. No, I carried it in my pocket. So like I got out of the stand one day and I was like, oh, my flashlight's on. So I like pulled it out and put it on my head. And I no more than took 3 steps from my tree and it died.
Yeah.
I was like,
I was on the phone that day with him when it happened, so I can.
I was
vouch
like,
for it.
what in the world is going on right now? But yeah, so keeping yourself prepared, we'll cover that here in 2 weeks whenever we do the next podcast filming. But another good thing, I kind of want to go back to this access thing because I really think that this is like the biggest thing that people struggle with is access in and out of their stand. And you have to understand like your access is what's going to make or break your hunt. So if you set up your access and it is just bad, you're walking through these crunching leaves and everything, you have to do something to change it. So like one of the biggest things, and David and I have talked about this and Dad and I have talked about this,
Leaf blowing pass.
a leaf blower is like your best friend.
Well, we're going to do something. We're going to do something to add to that in this next year. I'm going to look for a push mower that I can get, if I can find one relatively inexpensive that still somewhat runs and somewhat cuts. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't care what kind of shape it's in.
Just
But
butcher
we can
it.
kind of push mow paths. And the thing is, if you get one that's decent enough that you can push mow paths, if you can even just push mow deer paths through the woods, they'll love that even more and they will travel on them more heavily.
Well,
Yep.
another thing you can consider on that, instead of a push mower, look at getting a weed eater. It's a lot lighter to carry down there too.
Yep. Battery power weed eaters are great
Which
until they
I did
die.
a little bit of that this year, and just kind of just taking limb cutters and just kind of like lopping at limbs and stems, this or that, and that right there. So the reason you want to do your paths and deer paths is deer, like I said earlier, they're going to take the path of least resistance. So if you give them paths and yourself paths, there's less chance they're going to be walking your paths right up to your spot. And if you give them their own pass, it's in their comfort level. They may not even find your pass or just not want to use them because it's kind of out of their way.
Right.
Because if you start just giving them good paths that are only 2 year stands and not their own paths, they'll start changing their patterns.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then they're in your lap. They're not out where you want them to be.
Right. Sometimes it's always good to put a small obstruction in your way also through your path, just to make your path a little bit harder for them.
Yep,
One little tree to walk around or one little log to jump over.
If it doesn't deter them from doing it, you're at least going to more than likely hear them. Hopefully you've already seen them at that point if they're like right at the base of your tree. But I can tell you before, like there's certain places where you can hunt up there at our place, for example, where you'll have the deer in your lap before you even hear them.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
last Sunday when Kevin got his deer, I was sitting in the timber. He talked to me, this, that, whatever. Okay, it's time to go. And I had my backpack kind of tucked around me behind the tree. Well, I turn around and grab my backpack, and literally 3, maybe 5 yards most, I have a doe staring at me. Just
These
on
deer
the ground,
will
you're right eye to eye, just staring at me. And she stared at me for like 10, 15 minutes, then slowly walked off. Never got spooked or nothing, never blew or anything. But it was just, they can end up on top of you at no time. And you never know. Like, there's no telling how long she was standing there before I even turned around.
Yeah.
30, 45 minutes. Dad shot her boyfriend and she was like, what the hell, dude?
Yeah.
Come on now. Another thing that I want to kind of discuss, and I've never talked about this with you guys, but I saw something a couple months ago that I was like, you know what? That's genius. In the summertime, these deer are getting pestered by flies. And we've all seen it before on trail cameras or whatever, where these deer have 20, 30, 40, 50, hundreds of flies on them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that it's ever discussed enough how much pressure that actually puts on a deer, how much fatigue that puts on a deer.
Stress.
Stress is like a super big thing. You might end up with dead deer literally just because of the amount of flies that they've had trying to outrun them because they're literally eating them.
Right.
And I saw this thing a while back that was actually super smart where this guy, he started buying fly traps and putting them over deer paths so that
number down on the problems.
Yeah, so he would buy like the bulk pack of fly traps and he'd go out whenever he'd go set up his trail cameras and he'd put up a couple fly traps like around his trail cameras or whatever in different spots where he knows that deer frequent. And every time he'd go to check his trail cameras, he'd just bring down new sets of fly traps with a trash bag or a Walmart bag or whatever, and he'd throw the old fly traps in his bag and put a new one up. I mean, how productive do you guys actually think that is to being able to help your population's stress? Because I think that also cuts down on their skittishness. If they're not as stressed out, I think they're way more calm and they are less less likely to be on edge whenever you're out there hunting them, even months later.
Well, even in their summer patterns, they're all lackadaisical. So they're all just kind of nonchalant wandering around. And if they're in an area like, well, with most of our property, it's next to the creek. So it's at that point, middle of summer, no rain, it's stagnant. So there is a bunch of flies. So if that's, they go to the neighbors and maybe possibly they have a salt lick or, just some good acorn crawfish of that, they're going to probably stay over there more so than they would be maybe here because they're just not getting pestered.
Yeah.
Well, and the whole part of keeping deer herd is just, this is home. This is, it's nice to be here. So if that little bit of just maybe even helping with numbering down the flies, this or that, just making them a little more comfortable during their lackadaisical time. Later on, once you get to the middle or end of rut, when it's like, hey, where do I want to go? It's like, well, this was nice. Let's go here,
Never even thought about that. That's a good point.
And I saw that and I was like, that is so smart. Because we've seen it ourselves even. It like the pressure that these deer build year round is actually kind of crazy because, like if we start at the spring, does are dropping fawns. So they're stressed out because they just dropped a fawn. It may be their first fawn or whatever. They're stressed out about food because they need that food intake so they can keep producing for their fawn. The bucks are stressed out because they just dropped their racks. They're trying to figure out what's going on.
And the regrowth
regrowth and everything, that's super stressful on a deer. And then we move into the summertime where the flies become super bad. The heat, food is a problem, especially like in these Midwest states where we just constantly have droughts. And these deer are just unable to get food. That's super stressful on these deer. Yeah. And then you bump up to the fall and the rut starts and stress is spiked 1,000 times because, the doe are anxious because they're going into heat. The bucks are traveling miles a day trying to find the next hot doe or the first hot doe even. And then we go into the winter and these deer have lost 20, 30, 40 pounds because of the rut, these big bucks especially. And they're trying to put back on all this food weight. Now they're competing for food and that's super stressful. And then we go back to spring where they drop their racks and everything starts all over again. There's just this amount of stress that's on these deer year round that any way that you can find to be able to minimize it is going to increase your production in some way, somehow. So like we've started with the food plots. If you add more food into their ecosystem, they're going to be less stressed out because they don't have to hunt as much. And then you add in, bedding areas and they don't have to travel as far to bed. They have a sanctuary area where they know that they're safe. They can go to, they can relax, rest, whatever. Predator management, that's a super big one. And we have a coyote problem up at our farm right now. And we've discussed this extensively this year that we need to go out and shoot a couple coyote. And that's like another big thing that weighs down on these deer, especially in the springtime, whenever these doe drop their offspring, they're constantly trying to ward off these predators. There's like all this stuff that goes against them. So whatever you can do to make them a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more comfortable, they're going to stay in your area. They're going to stay to what's comfortable year round. So if you take that one doe, like what we had 6 years ago, and you just slowly improve the habitat, it doesn't have to be something that happens over one season. If you slowly improve, just I can spare $25 this paycheck. I can go out and get 5 bags of corn, put out some corn. That's food. It's something, and you're giving back. And these
$25 to get 5 bags of corn, man. Where you getting your corn?
Where are you buying corn?
I haven't bought corn in like 8 years, so I don't know where I buy corn at. Anyway,
it's like $15 a bag now.
Well, okay, then you're $25, $30 will buy you 2 bags of corn. It's still better than nothing.
Yes.
If you're giving back to your population is going to become healthier. And I personally believe that the healthier that your herd is, the less pressure that's on them, the less stress they're going to be. I don't want to say the easier the hunt's going to be because that's the wrong terminology, but the more, I think the more activity you'll see in that sense.
You're increasing your odds.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, at the end of the day, it's all about conservation anyway. If I can help grow the herd, whether I'm able to harvest a deer or not,
I still do my part.
I'm doing my part to help the herd become a better, stronger herd. I don't want to see these deer go down and have major health issues. I don't want to lose a herd because of CWD or anything else. So I want to help the herd the best I can without causing any negative side effects.
We've been very fortunate on the CWD front as well to, knock on wood, not have an outbreak in our area that we know of anyway.
Right.
And I think that also ties back into how healthy our herd is in our specific area. That these deer are less pressured, they are happy, they're healthy, they are able to, mingle around one another and not have to worry about that. Because, being sick, obviously, like, it's stressful on us as humans. I can imagine it's probably stressful on them as well. And it's even more stressful for them because, they can't just DoorDash food to their bedding area. They got to go find it. So, if you're able to eliminate a factor per season, let's say you have 10 factors that you have a concern about: bedding, food, flies, disease, whatever. Find something that you can limit, that you can put just a little bit of money into, and it's going to make your herd better. And it's going to increase your odds. It's going to increase the amount of activity that you're seeing. I mean, Dad and I were talking about this the other day. And we've even discussed it here. We have never seen the amount of activity that we're seeing on our farm this year, ever.
Something else, one of the guys at work does, you're talking about, just trying to help out. Some things that don't even cost money. One of the guys I work with, he goes out every year with his weed eater or lawnmower. I can't remember which one he does it with. And he goes to where he finds big oak trees and he mows around them.
So it's easier for
He
him.
mows a big circle around them because guess what? They're not trying to dig through the grass to try to find the acorns. They're right there. It's like easy pickings in the yard. I mean, another guy I work with, he's got deer that he calls them his yard deer. They come up to his yard to eat acorns because they're easier to find in his mowed grass.
Yeah, it's an open buffet instead of paying, for just a little portion.
It's funny that you say that because I saw a video the other day. I don't know if I sent it to you guys, but this guy, it was on TikTok. And this guy, he has acorn trees out in his front yard that fall onto his driveway. And he literally would take a broom out every couple days. And he would broom up the acorns and he'd put them into 40-pound feed bags. And he'd tape them off or tie them up or whatever. And whenever next spring comes around and these deer are hunting for food that may not be there yet, whether the crops haven't been planted yet or whatever, or even in the winter, whenever food's hard to come by for these deer, he would take out these 40-pound feed bags and go dump them. It's free. He's literally getting them straight from his property, bagging them and taking them down out back and dumping them out in the fields for these deer in piles so that they can find them. It's a good way for you to take inventory of your herd, because you could put a camera on it and be like, okay, I know that I've got deer here. I know these deer survived. These deer did not, or may not have, whatever the case may be. But you're also increasing your sustainability on your own property. These deer are not going to have to travel. And I think that's one thing that we've done really well this year is we have deer that are homebodies, that, like bucks specifically. I mean, does have a much smaller roam range than a buck does, especially during the rut. But like the deer that Caden killed, for example, as far as we know, we don't have any photos of him.
No.
But we've had bucks that disappeared the entire rut. Our big 12 point, he just showed back up on camera, a week ago? Last
Something
Thursday.
Like that, yeah. I mean, we've had deer that, I remember the one you nicknamed Muley that you hunted hard and heavy and never saw.
Yep.
We had how many hundreds of pictures of him pre-season?
Velvet, and then as soon as he shedded his velvet, he was gone.
And then all of a sudden he disappeared. And then nobody got him that year. And the next season, the guy, a neighbor behind us, got him that next season.
It was early season whenever he shot him too, wasn't it?
Yes, I believe so.
These deer have these home ranges that they work during the summers, and this is a very well-known topic, but these deer have home ranges in the summer, and then they kind of expand off of them. So if you can give them a reason to shrink their home range, i.e. giving back to the land, these food plots, bedding areas, so on and so forth, in your doe population, you're going to have bucks that are going to start staying closer to home. This 12 point that we had this year that was really nice, that was, I'm pretty sure, was our top hit list buck. He was there all summer. We had tons of pictures of him, and he disappeared right whenever season started.
I don't say we didn't have much. September, mid-September, about the time he disappeared.
Yeah.
We had the 9 point that had the split G3. We had hundreds of thousands of videos of him.
And he disappeared.
He disappeared.
Back up.
We have one picture of him where he was crossing down through that bottom field heading away from the camera. That's the only photo we've gotten of him. And that was
for sure
right before rifle season. I think that, like, these deer, if you give them a reason to stay closer to home, they're going to. The bucks that you 3 killed this year, we're pretty sure were home bodies.
Yep.
They were not traveling
real
far.
Close inside, we couldn't tell you which one we had on camera when.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all look like
they're the triplets.
Sure.
We thought that we had 1 buck whenever in reality we had 3. But it's super, it's super important to be able to give back so that these deer may stay closer. Because you're going to increase your herd size. And I think the biggest tool to do this is going to be a trail camera. Because a trail camera, if you can set it up in an area where you're capturing photos of deer, you can do this inventory and you can say, man, I'm getting 30, 40, 50 pictures of bucks, but I'm getting 2 pictures of doe, and it's 1 doe by itself. Maybe you don't harvest a doe that year. Maybe you're like, you know what? I'm going to take a couple years. I'm not going to harvest a doe. I'm going to harvest a buck. I can go to public land or whatever. I got a buddy that's got a bunch of doe. He's got a doe problem. I'm going to go try to net me 6 doe and bring them back. I'm just kidding. But you could shoot a doe off of his property and, fill the freezer that way so that you're not putting that pressure on those deer that doesn't need to be there, which would be harvesting that last doe, because it may be 3 years before another doe moves back onto your property.
Well, there's the conservation side of everything even. So if you take that route, hey, he's got a doe problem. Let's go over there and take a doe for him, help his herd, so it helps my herd.
Yep.
Conservation ain't just at your home base. It's, throughout the whole, game, anywhere and everywhere, if you can help out in any way, it's just kind of doing your part as a hunter.
100%. And that's another thing that we've discussed this year is trying to get the people that are around our property involved in some way, whether or not they have hunters that maybe we can get them to work with us on, hey, let's let these specific, 3, 4, 5 bucks go a couple more years. Or let's try to avoid taking a doe for the next year or 2 so that we can increase our doe population. Stuff like that, even in your home area or wherever you're hunting at, is going to help you out. And even if they say, no, I'm not going to work with you, I want to shoot whatever I want to shoot, that's 100% their right, no problem. But if you extend out that olive branch, they may be able to give you something back in return, whether that be information. You may even be able to get access to that land. You may be able to scout that land if your land's not preferable for scouting. Obviously, if you run a bunch of timber on your property, if you have 80 acres of timber, but the guy right next to you has 120 acres of fields, it's way easier to scout 120 acres of field with a spotting scope than what it is to take a 10 by 42 binocular into the woods and scout, especially early season. So stuff like that, wherever you're able to make ties with the people that are around you, I think that that'll also help your chances of being able to see more deer. I don't want to attribute everything to being able to kill a deer, right? Because it's hunting, it's not killing. But the ultimate goal is to be able to fill a tag at some point throughout the season. And I think that if you want to increase those odds, you have to look at what your herd needs. If that makes any kind of sense. So I think that will go ahead and wrap it up for today, just because it's getting kind of late and all of us have work tomorrow. So we will shoot for 2 weeks from now doing this again. and we are just going to continue rolling through with some different ideas. We're going to keep posting up on our Instagram for what you guys want us to talk about. We've kind of discussed the different things that we want to talk about, but we will get to your guys' questions, even if it's a brief answer to your questions. Today's episode, we kind of bounced all over the place, kind of talking about a little bit of everything, but hopefully you guys were able to take something out of this to be able to bring back to your herd or to your farm that you guys are working, to be able to help you guys out. And then we'll just continue expanding off of this into the different realms. So I think, like I said earlier, 2 weeks from now, we're going to discuss our setup specifically, and then like what we carry in and out of the woods with us and why we have it there. And then we'll just keep building off of that. Do any of you guys have anything to add?
No, I'll say that's a good point there. It's just kind of, step by step, we'll take each and every, aspect and break it down as much as we can to make it, easier to understand.
Yeah, because we're by no stretch professionals, but I think that what we have done kind of shows that anybody can do what we're doing. We've all learned this ourselves.
And we're still learning every day.
And we're still learning now. Like, we don't know everything. So, like I've
if you're
said,
not learning, you might as well hang it up.
Yep.
Exactly.
Like I've said a few times during this, like, this is what's worked for us. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you. That doesn't mean it's going to work for your friend. That doesn't mean it's going to work for Jimmy down the road. But it's something that we've seen that maybe you can take back and be able to use on your side to maybe help you be able to harvest or see more deer, even if that's just your goal. And I think that will wrap it up for today. So we will see you guys next time.
See ya.
See ya.
Take it easy, guys.